one of the things that I found in the literature is that capacity building is something that's talked about in organizational development in that field. Mm-hmm. Capacity building is not something that, well, it may be something that we talk about in education, but I don't think that we talk about it at the level, Dr. Harsh, that you do. Is this maybe a new field or a new way of looking at education?
I think it's a new way of managing the learning and the development of skills that all of our staff and our children as well need to have. Whenever our learning and our requirements for not only completing school but in the workplace get more complex, and our organization and the functioning of those organizations become more complex, we can't use simple solutions for cultivating that expertise. And capacity building is one of the solutions or processes that is in the literature, that is available and is very successful in bringing everyone who is participating in that capacity building to a new level of skill.
Dr. Harris, tell me about the first time you encountered Dr. Harsh and her presentation of some of these concepts. Did it resonate with you, as you think about your experiences in education?
Yes. In fact, my first encounter with Dr. Harsh was actually when I was at the U.S. Department of Education, and we were engaged in some work around capacity building. In fact, a lot of our work at that time was associated with how can we better support SEAs with all of the innovation and policy initiatives that are going on. How can we support them? How could we support them better with the implementation of those policies at the state level, recognizing that unless they got down to a classroom where the teacher and student got the benefit of that policy, it really wasn't a beneficial policy. So that was my first encounter with Dr. Harsh. But what resonated with me was a reflection of my own experiences, and my own experiences being, engaged in policies that either were developed at the local level by local school boards or at the state level when I was a superintendent, or even at the district level as a superintendent. I found myself always engaging in new policy development. But the key thing for me in a reflective moment was the fact that all the policies that I was engaged in developing myself, I wasn't quite sure, in fact I was certain, that the policy never reflected everything that I wanted it to when it actually got down to the delivery mode. And so it was this huge gap between a concept of what you would really like to see happen and then that concept actually taking place at the site where it was determined to be.
And you think that the capacity building approach maybe is a way to ensure that implementation does occur with fidelity?
Absolutely. I think you have to make sure that you clearly understand the conduit that you're going to use to take an idea, whether it's a large idea or a small idea, from a conceptual stage to an implementation stage. Mm-hmm. And I think in the past, I know from my own experiences, I didn't pay as much attention to that as I should have. And I've learned over the years, and the more I'm engaged in capacity building work, I clearly understand how important it is to make sure that from a conceptual standpoint of an idea, it really is not a great idea unless you can have that idea implemented where it was intended to be implemented.
Do you agree, Dr. Harsh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's absolutely correct that we can fill shelves with all sorts of documents and plans and policies and guidance, but unless that is actually translated into work that makes a difference in the classroom or in the workplace, all of those beautiful documents are for naught if it doesn't make a difference in what we do.
I would assume that the SEAs and the districts and even the schools probably share some of the same goals in terms of they'd like to see things implemented well. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that many people aren't real familiar with capacity building as it's being proposed in the model that we're using in the ARC. How do you get people on board? How do you introduce them to this?
That's a great question. One of the things that we established very early on as we work with staff, particularly with the State Department of Education, that's what we call SEA, State Department of Education staff, is that we honor where they are, what they have accomplished, and the next steps that they want to take. And we take that journey with them. Capacity building is not something you do to people. Capacity building is something you do with people. We do shoulder-to-shoulder work, which means that we help them chart out where they want to go with this complex work that they're doing, and then work side by side with them to gain the skills and the knowledge that they need. And these are very highly trained, highly experienced people who have been successful in their field, successful in education, and successful at the State Departments of Education. So capacity building is not done with someone who is deficient or for punitive reasons. It's a growth process where you help that individual find the skills that they need and then work with them to develop them.
And that's a nice transition into an area that I'd like to discuss a little bit, and that's what I'm going to call the psychology of capacity building. Because, you know, in traditional organizational consulting, an external agent is often hired to solve a problem. They're brought in and a transaction occurs wherein they expend time and effort in exchange for a solution, and in turn they get a financial reward for doing that. But I think in many instances, much of the work of the consultant is done in isolation or far removed from the members of the organization. Change may occur, but a lot of times the internal stakeholders may have little to do with either the diagnosis of the issue or its remediation. And the capacity building model that you're proposing emphasizes, if I'm hearing you correctly, collaboration. It emphasizes facilitation and collective transformation. It seems as though members of the organization are working shoulder to shoulder with you to identify the needs, envision a preferred future, and generate a solution, and they become co-participants in solution making. Is this accurate?
That is, you're absolutely correct. And there are two terms that when you read the psychological literature, since you're talking about the psychology of capacity building, there are two terms that come into play, and two, not phenomena, but conditions for folks to be successfully engaged in capacity building. The first is what's called locus of control, and the second is what's called efficacy. Efficacy is a term that we use a lot when we work with children in schools, and what efficacy means is giving someone the ability or the support that they need so they have the confidence that they can do this work and they believe that they can do this work. In adults as well with children, to build their efficacy to do new work that's more complex, you have to also be realistic. So you have to map out a journey that allows them to develop the knowledge and the skills and the structures that they need to be able to do that. So that's genuine efficacy, when they not only have confidence, but they have the skills and the knowledge to do the work. The second is what's called locus of control, and that means that the person actually has not only a say in the work that's being done, but they actually share in crafting that plan, and they share in the work in building that plan and implementing it and doing realizing the new goal. So locus of control is not doing something to someone, but having them be an active participant where they are controlling and working on and actually shaping their own future.
And I would assume that their level of investment then in the initiative is much greater and probably would help ensure a greater sustainability over the long term.
That is correct.
Any thoughts about that, Dr. Harris?
One other thing I'd like to add to that is I think one of the things that I've learned in the engagement of the capacity model is the fact that for me it's erasing the assumptions that everyone know everything I know, especially if I am the originator of the policy. Because I think quite often we originate policies and we put them in nice manuals and we send them out with the belief that everyone knows as much about the policy as the person who originated the policy or the people who originated the policy. And there's a tremendous gap there. So what you want to happen is that same level of knowledge and expertise at the original level to be transcended down to all throughout all the levels, so that there's a clear, consistent understanding of the message, and the message doesn't get confused in the process.